6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit and we have liftoff at 2:13. 275 million pounds of thrust, and it has cleared the tower.
Prepare yourself for a world of science. This is
Welcome one, welcome all, everybody. Conley here. It is a science night in the morning. Yes, you know it. And we have Dr. Sean Graham here all the way from down under. And we're going to be talking about a very interesting episode today. It's kind of the science behind logging and traveling. But to kind of pinpoint it, be a little specific here, we're going to just kind of focus a little bit on Mongolia. Right? The Mongols, is that what we're going to be kind of talking about? The Mongols?
Yeah, this is fairly, trying to think of a fun show to do. And I just got back from a trip to Mongolia where I was there for a couple weeks. And so why not, everybody has their idea of what Mongolia is like, what it used to be like. And I was the same way. I was wondering what it's like now, because it's been undergoing a huge amount of development over the past 20 years. And so I can be your tour guide here and give you an idea of what Mongolia is like right now, focusing on some of the kind of sciencey stuff that I saw. So yeah, we'll do a little travelogue, a pretty self-indulgent travelogue, tell you about my trip to Mongolia. And, I don't like talking to my relatives. And so this, when they ask me what the trip was like, I'll tell them just check out this show.
Well, there you go. Now they can get all the adventures right here. Now, whenever I think Mongolia, right, I'm thinking about the people, right? The people are very unique. But I always imagine like a hybrid between a full-on Asian and a Russian, like a Asian's person's head with a Russian's like giant body. Polar bear.
That's spot on. That's spot
is it really?
It is. And this is really hard to talk about without sounding, completely racist or something. So, but you brought it up. You asked the question. So I did. Everybody, it's Conley's question. I'm just trying to do my best to answer it. But yes, Asian features, right?
Yeah.
But very, very large. If you're picturing like tiny little, people, which, racist people might say about people from East Asia, like Conley, that's not what you should picture. Giant. Some of these, we saw the traditional wrestling.
Yeah.
And these dudes were enormous. I even thought, I'm in pretty good shape. And a lot of these wrestling contests will just allow any spectator to come in and give it a shot. And I was like, yeah, I might do that and just, be a hoot. Yeah. And I took one look at these guys and said, no, they would broke me in half. Huge, giant, 6'4", 300 pounds, not all muscle, but enough muscle,
Yeah.
And with the wrestling, there's no weight limit, right? So there's no featherweight class, which, at this point, I'd probably have to fight those guys. Like so the bigger, the stouter, and have maybe a little bit of fat, almost like sumo wrestling, Whoa. Apparently some of these wrestlers from Mongolia have started sumo wrestling and they're cleaning up.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, they're smashing because they're more wily and slippery and they've got more moves than sumo wrestlers. So yeah, so they're and I'll tell you, I think I was curious about what it was going to be like. And, this is my first trip to Asia. I've never been to Asia. And I was impressed. They were a very cool, kind of proud people. They basically ignored foreigners, walk right past you. And nobody's running out of their way to, ask you anything. And sometimes some of the younger ones, they're learning English, so they could come up to you and ask you questions in English. But they seem to have a lot of pride, which I like people. It's not like this poor place with, because I've been to places where it's overwhelmingly poor and it can be very depressing and kind of make you feel guilty for being there. and it wasn't like that at all. So that was cool.
Huh. Well, that's neat. You kind of just blended right in then.
The kids stared at you. They've never seen any, but the adults just kind of, they were great. They were super friendly when you're dealing with them one-on-one, but they're just going about their own business. That's
Did
kind
they
of what I'm
touch
getting.
your red hair?
No, touching the head is there's all kinds of little rules that I kind of read about before I left. And the head is kind of traditionally like the seat of the soul, I guess, in a way. And so like you're not supposed to touch another dude's hat. Like if you
Whoa.
saw some funny looking hat and thought, oh, this is cool, I'm just going to take this off this guy's head and put it on. It'll be funny. It wouldn't be funny. And it
Yeah.
might be the end. So no. And even, if you patted a kid on the head, shoulder is the safe touch. Shoulder, you're all right, just about anywhere. But top of the head, somebody I was with on the tour patted a kid on the top of the head, and one of the adults kind of visibly
gave him the stanky eye.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
yeah.
So they have interesting traditions, and so you were
respectful. Got really cool traditions. Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, we'll talk. Tell me about your trip. Tell me before we do the overview, like let's start linearly, right? Because you had to prepare.
Yeah.
You learned the language.
Yeah. So I'll give you a couple of so the background is I went with my father-in-law, who's a farmer in Australia. And he read a few books about Mongolia, became obsessed with the idea that there are still people living as nomads, like the old traditional way.
Yeah.
And so this has been his dream trip for a long time. And then COVID got in the way and he put it off. And then finally he pulled the trigger and he got one of these canned tours that you can get where you're going to be, on a tour with a bunch of other people, strangers, for 2 weeks on a road trip. Basically, that's kind of what it was. And the tour. I was excited when I realized that what the tour was going to do is basically make a kind of longitudinal track, a longitudinal cross section across the whole country from north to south. We'd start at the capital, which is kind of in the northeast, to go due south to the Gobi Desert, then straight back up north across the steppes up to the far north where it's forest, like taiga, like the Russian, Siberia.
What kind of trees up there?
It's basically almost all larch, which I can talk to you about. I'll talk about in a second. And then just a couple other species, like this really cool extensive forest with just a single species of evergreen. Well, it's actually not an evergreen. It's a conifer that drops its leaves in the fall. We've got something like it up in like Canada and northern US called a tamarack. And so people from Minnesota will be familiar with that tree. People from Texas will have no idea what I'm talking about. But it's a larch, and this time of year it's summertime, so it's fully greened. It looks a little bit like, I don't know, Colorado or something like that. It's very mountainous, more mountainous than I would have thought. So anyway, that's kind of that was going to be the itinerary. Had no idea what to expect, but I read a ton of books about, Genghis Khan, Mongol hordes, and all the other crazy nomadic, invasions through history that have had their source in the steppe. And then a ton of reading about the types of plants and animals I could expect to find. So by the time I started the tour, I could have been a tour guide. In fact, our tour guide was like, "Man, you prepared a lot for this, didn't you?" And I was like, "Man, you're on my tour. What are you talking about? Get ready, buckle up."
Yeah.
So I did a ton of, and I find that studying for a trip like that improves your enjoyment of it. And it was a great time. And that's kind of the setup. Now we can get to the kind of nitty gritty. All right. So what's your first question about what Mongolia is like?
Well, okay. I would think I love the Mongols, right? Like Genghis Khan, the Khans, Attila the Hun, you have these steppe people, like, and you have these people that basically grew up on horses. So I would automatically assume that horses are everywhere up there. Like,
you're right.
And
So That's the first thing I'll tell you, like maybe the most important thing I could tell you about current day Mongolia
Uh-huh.
is that it's basically a giant pasture with no fences
Wow.
filled with livestock. So
Livestock.
people are
Okay.
still doing it. And it's unfenced. So it's not like it is in any other kind of cow country you can think of in the US. My father-in-law was asking me, is there any places in the States like this where it's like grassland with livestock with no fences? And I was like, no, there's basically nothing like this. Like there are places where there's ranches and they're all fenced off. And because they're fenced, most of the grassland has been just destroyed, right? And then the places where the American steppe was, the tall grass prairie, the midgrass prairie, the Great Plains, is destroyed. It's
Right.
been completely plowed over and planted with, we use fossil water to irrigate crops, and they never did that in Mongolia. There's probably no fossil water, and the soil there is probably no good anyway, and the growing season's too short, and so they just kept it. It's just this big pasture, and so the different kind of livestock. There's basically tons of horses. In the south, there's Bactrian camels, and they're all domestic. They're herding them. There's goats and sheep, and in the north there's yaks. And so everywhere you go, traffic patterns in Mongolia are determined by the goats. They're going to just cross the road where you're always stopping for them to come across. And there'll be these little, the felt tents, the gurs.
Yeah.
Most people call yurts. They call them
Yurts.
gurs.
Yep.
Where the ranchers live. And in the old days, of course, they moved around quite a lot. They went around on horseback mostly. Nowadays, the gurs have like a motorcycle, a satellite dish, solar panels, and like a little Russian van, plus horses, plus the old-fashioned dogs. So it's like this mix of the old and the new. They're still kind of doing some of the old traditions, but they've accepted, actually fuel, if you can believe it, like gasoline is super cheap in Mongolia. So
Really?
you would have thought that'd be the reason. Like, why wouldn't they just use horses? Well, because you can buy petrol at the pump like it's water. And so fuel up your crappy old motorcycle and use that because it's more convenient.
Wow.
And then instead of packing up your gur on a horse sled or something, just put it on top of your Soviet era bus and drive it 40 miles to the wintering grounds. So they still move around. They are nomads, but they've got a couple of modern accoutrements.
So they would feel at home like in California.
Yeah, well, so it's almost like the snowbird thing. I'm not sure how important it is for them to move in terms of their herds, or if it's just something that they've held on to. Like we gotta move to these other areas because it's part of our culture. We never actually got to ask that question. We did get to hang out with some of the nomads, but some of them were known to our tour guides, and so we were kind of dropping in on their friends, and it was kind of, those people were basically very tourist associated. So I'm not sure if they're a good representative sample of what's going on with everybody else.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting that they still preserve that way of life. Like it's kind of embedded in their culture still.
And it preserved the land better than our tall grass prairie.
Yeah.
Right. So it's all herds and domestic animals and not wild animals. That's better for things like birds, plants, small mammals, like things like reptiles. It's basically that you took the wild animals that would have been there and replaced them with domestic ones. Now, here's the cool thing though, for those of you who are like, oh man, I wish the wild animals were still there. That's what the national parks are for. So there's big national parks in Mongolia, including one that they claim to be the oldest in the world. They claim it's older than Yellowstone. And if you count it as a national park, it is. It was set up in the 1700s or something like that by like the Buddhist lamas. And it was like a sacred mountain. and they made it. They basically said it's totally off limits for hunting or anything like that.
Wow.
Now, if it counts as a national park, it is older than Yellowstone. It's right outside the capital. It's called Bogd Khan Mountain. It's beautiful. It's this big mountain. You can hike to it from downtown Ulaanbaatar. I did it on the last day. Nothing to do.
Were there
Yeah, the whole
trailheads,
day.
like all different kinds of trailheads?
Yeah, I mean, I just basically found, I was just going to walk, and you can kind of see trails worn into the hillsides because it's like, it's grassland up until you get higher, and then it turns into forest.
Yeah.
And I walked. It was like 3 miles to where the base of the hill started, and then I walked another 3 or 4 miles straight up into the forest.
Wow.
And it was like hiking from Denver, downtown Denver, to the top of Rocky Mountain National Park or something in 2 hours. It
That's
was like
crazy.
Here, and it was great. But anyway, so there's other big national parks all over the place, and they've done a pretty good job of preserving their wildlife, and I saw all of it, basically, nearly all of it. Saw two kinds of gazelles, saw ibex, saw two kinds of deer, tons of birds. So that, for the big game, I did pretty well. No predatory mammals, because they still, since there's herders everywhere, and they have guns, they would shoot a wolf on sight. So wolves are still common in Mongolia, but you never see them. They're just like, always on the run, always sneaking
They've
around.
adapted to be invisible.
We went to this, so there's this the Altai Mountains are in the far west, and they taper and teeter out into the Gobi Desert, into these mountain ranges that are not unlike the kind of desert ranges of the Southwest.
Nice.
And up there, incredibly, these desert mountain ranges, there's ibex, there's Argali sheep, which are like bighorn, and all this other wild game, plus all the domestic animals in the national park. They're allowed to herd in the national park because it's nomadic culture, and they're like, yeah, that's just something you do.
Interesting.
So protection is basically you can't hunt in the national parks, and so you'll see things that are edible there that you don't see elsewhere. So, for example, marmots are super common in the national parks. It's basically a woodchuck.
Oh, woodchuck. Okay.
Yeah, woodchuck's kind of marmot. And then we got lots of marmots in the the Rockies, the Pacific Northwest, and they've got a ton of marmots. They're big, furry, beautiful, rodents that burrow in the ground. And
they're cute. They look like kind of like a little half squirrel, half beaver.
Yeah, and they're super edible. They're delicious, and so they once, if you read any of the historical accounts about Mongolia, even like 100 years ago, like Roy Chapman Andrews, he said the steppes were just tripping over marmots. He even says in his thing, there'll never be a day when there's not tons of marmots in Mongolia. Well, he's wrong. They're not, except in the national parks where they're protected. So you can set foot in the national park, they're everywhere, and outside you'll never see a marmot because they eat them. They're a delicacy.
Wow. So they'll eat a marmot.
Yeah.
Squirrel.
And so in the desert range, the desert mountain range there, they call it the Gobi Altai. It's this beautiful desert range with there's these, imagine huge, steep, craggy rock outcrops that go up 1,000 feet, with not condors, but vultures, circling around, and a big, beautiful male ibex. And in that range, there are snow leopards.
Oh, sweet. Very cool.
That's like,
did you get your eyes on one?
Hell no. If you can live in West Texas for 7 years and not see a mountain lion, you're never going to see a snow leopard in a desert mountain range in Mongolia in a day.
Yeah, probably not.
Of course, I kept my eyes peeled, but no way. But that's the kind of protection they have. They do a pretty good job. And so, there are it's got to be the best place in Asia for seeing wildlife. I just can't imagine it better anywhere else.
You mentioned a lot of livestock everywhere. Do they have an overgrazing problem, or is that something that, kind of, because when you think of Tragedy of the Commons, right? Is that what it's called? That paper, it's a scientific paper where it basically showed how overgrazing can lead to dust bowls and deserts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
So that's a great question. And to me, it didn't seem like it. because again, I think they basically replaced a couple of wild species that would have been at essentially the same stocking densities as the domestic animals,
Mhm.
and replace them with domestics. And here's the thing, they've been doing that for like 4,000 years, right?
Jeez. Wow.
You know, they domesticated the Bactrian camel was domesticated probably 4,000 years ago. The horse was domesticated longer ago than that. Goats and sheep even longer than that. And all of those would have gotten into that area pretty early. Like, so the Bronze Age is probably around the time whenever people really started uh, piling into Mongolia and using it, right?
Yeah.
And there's like petroglyphs from that time that are unbelievable. There's this incredible petroglyph of two archers on horseback,
Mhm.
and they're leading two argali sheep towards another archer on horseback, and that's the
Nice.
whole story about the hunt.
Wow.
And so there, it shows you that in the Bronze Age they were on horseback, right? They were
Yeah.
mounted archers. They had domesticated the horse, and they're going after wild animals. And I can't, Argali lived like Bighorn up in the mountains. How were they doing that anyway? Yeah, so they, whatever history of land use and livestock they've had has been very long, and it seems like the grass is awfully short.
Yeah.
It gets cropped, but the wildflowers were just through the roof.
All right.
The kinds of birds that would rely on grasses were very common. And so, I read a paper where they were looking at that question, and they did some exclusion plots within the national park, the same one I was just describing to you.
Hmm.
And they say in that paper, look, they let livestock in this national park, and they've been doing this for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And if you want to see what the effect of livestock is, you put these little exclusion fences, little squares where you
Right.
put fences and let the livestock go in, and then just go in and count the plants inside and out, right?
Yeah.
Simple little experiment.
Yeah.
And they were like, yeah, the grass inside the plot that's protected from wildlife is way more dense, but it's mostly like dead plant material. So it's
Mm.
like this surplus, if it doesn't get grazed, it just dies back and doesn't do anything. So
Mm.
might as well graze it. And who knows? These authors may have conflict of interest. They lived in that national park. They spoke to the pastoralists. They probably sympathized with the Mongolians. I would too. It'd be hard not to. And so I think all things being equal, it's probably fine. I'd like to see more wild animals there, and maybe over time, as tourism becomes more important than livestock,
Yeah.
that's probably what will happen. They're
Wow.
very keen to get more tourists there.
So they are. It's not like England or somewhere where they kind of scoff at tourists. I guess England's not like that, but there are places out there where they kind of just look at, oh man, another tourist, but they actually welcome tourism.
Yeah, I think I would say they're very welcoming to tourists, and the tourists there I think, are doing a pretty good job of making sure that stays that way.
Hmm.
Like for example, we were going around, and anytime we'd see kids, we'd hand them out little toys and things. So we'd hand them
Oh
out
yeah.
like notebooks with pencils, and so like it was like for these kids, it was like, wow, do you remember that day those Martians just came in and just handed us
It
presents?
gave us like black cat fireworks and stuff.
Yeah.
Those are good days.
We didn't do that, but they would have probably loved that had we done
Yeah, I
that.
bet.
But yeah, and they really appreciate it if you try. Like I learned some Mongolian phrases before I left, and I was surprised that I was like the only one in the tour who did that, who
Huh.
bothered.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The tour group was like there. I found out that there are these people who are like professional tourists,
Tourists. Wow.
who they've been like, some of these people had been to over 100 countries,
Wow. And
and the
do they
only
blog? Do
time,
they have a blog or something
I
that they
don't
work
know.
on?
It's just like they're often single, right? They don't have kids or a family, and fair enough. They're using all their extra money to see the world. Well, like that makes sense to me.
Wow.
But at the same time, like I think they've only seen all these countries from the end of one of these kind of tours, right? Where they're
Right.
there with 16 other gringos,
Sure.
and they're getting taken from one camp to the next. They're eating really good food, and they never go off the beaten path. They're going to crazy wild place. Like this tour, I don't want to give you the impression that this tour was 100% together, because it
Okay.
wasn't. Like
Oh, good. Good.
and it was good, because that's fine. Like that's good. Yeah, there were times when I was like, wow, this is like me and my buddies going down to Mexico, and we have no idea what we're doing, and we're getting lost, and we're just showing up at somebody's house and asking for directions. This tour was not slick, and I was glad for it.
Yeah.
And they didn't hawk over us. I was very worried that they would manage us, right? That, oh no,
Corral.
don't go over there. There's a scorpion under that rock. You're gonna get in trouble. Like I was a wild man. I was just walking off on my own all the time. They would say, we're going to go to this Buddhist temple. And I'd be like, no, I'm not. I'm going to go hiking today. And they were 100% fine with it. And we got lost as hell in the Gobi Desert, obviously.
Yeah.
And the rest of the tour group was kind of freaking out. But I kind of, I quickly, figured out from their body language what was going on almost at all times. And I would just be like, look, does everyone want me to tell you what's going on? It sounds like you all need to know what's going on, because I could care less. I was just along for the ride.
Yeah.
But that's the way everybody is, because they're from the West and they want to know what's going on. And if there's a wrong turn, they want to know why. And I was like, just calm down and just go with the flow, people. But it's like, look, I don't think we're super lost, but we're definitely lost. And we were supposed to get from point A to point B in 3 hours, and it took us all day.
Wow.
All day. But it was one of the best days of the trip, because we were way off of the normal path. And so it was like all of a sudden the wildlife was bonkers.
Yeah.
Because we're everywhere. We saw bustards, which are super rare birds. Crazy desert scenery, and I felt like I was back in Mexico. I got a big rural desert Mexico vibe.
Really?
From the desert. Definitely.
Very cool.
Definitely.
Very cool. Are there drug cartels
in a good way? And no. In all the good ways.
All the good ways. Okay. All right. All right. No, that's interesting. Yeah. Whenever I think tourists, I think, the kind of, pre-diabetic people with shades the size of half their face, and they got the big hats, and they got the big binoculars, and they're just eating all the food.
We look like that, but then that's what I would have thought too. But then they're all professional tourists, remember? So they've been to million places. They're all interested. They're into it. And I don't want to make them out to be, God forbid that listen to this and make me think I'm putting them on. But no, they were all very good. The anxiety to know what's going on, I had to bury it. I had to stuff it. It's just something that we're born with in the West, and we need that. And that was happening. They would be the first to admit it. But everything else, like, they did very well. And that's the cool thing about the professional tourist sect, which if you ever take one of these canned tours in any other country, you'll meet these people. Is that their eyes were open. They wanted to see the odd, weird stuff, and they were interested in the culture. And they were happy I was along, because I knew I was pointing out what all the wildlife was.
Yeah.
And I mean, they were up for anything. And that's good. We need more people like that.
Yeah, I agree too. Have you ever seen The Mist?
Yeah.
was it kind of like, did everybody after the first few days, did everybody have that kind of persona, that character, that kind of?
Yeah. Well, that happens in I'm so used to that from doing my field classes, that if you get in small groups, you have there's 3 days of people being polite, and then by the first week, the true personalities start to show, and then there's always a fight at some point.
Oh shoot.
There's always, it's just inevitable. Yeah.
There's a fight.
People get not
like
physical,
a spouse bickering.
Not like a Jean-Claude Van Damme. But so just like people get edgy.
Yeah.
And if it lasted longer than 2 weeks, you'd probably have some people leaving the tour because they couldn't take it.
Oh wow.
But no, that I was used to that. I've seen it a million times on other trips, and that's exactly what happened. You're right. It was like The Mist.
Yeah, that little grocery sacker, you know, that just blossoms into bravery. You know, people have
Yeah.
these like life-changing experiences on these things, I'm sure, and just being able to observe that person like changing, you know, something awakening in them must be pretty neat.
Yeah, I think the only person on our trip that had not done a lot of traveling was my father-in-law, because
Oh,
the
okay.
reason why I was there, he
Yeah.
wanted he wanted somebody who could, navigate the airports and stuff, and he did great. But he did, I think he had one of those formative experiences, at the age of 73. He
Cool.
he was the one who probably was affected the most by the trip. Yeah.
Well, that's
In
great,
a good
man.
way, in a good way.
All right. Well, cool. Well, tell me about the do they just saw like in traditional Mongol fashion, just saw the meat off the bone and just let it flop on your plate? Are there a lot of soups? Like what kind of cuisine
Yeah,
is
so it's
normal
funny.
around there?
If you read anything about the tours in Mongolia and travel in Mongolia, everyone always knocks the food, and I think probably the tour companies have read those reviews enough that they've fixed it,
Hmm.
because the food was awfully good. Um, like traditional Mongolian food is like a lot like it's supposed to be a lot of meat, dairy, and basically nothing else, and we had a little bit of that. But since we were on this tour, we were staying at pretty nice little camps. They would make, we had like a three-course meal. We'd had like a
Hmm.
soup, a little salad, like, which was often like some variation of coleslaw.
Okay.
You wouldn't believe the million kind of ways of coleslaw and potato salad that they made, and they were all nice. And then there'd be some sort of like a meat dish, which often would be like a stew or meat with noodles, or Salisbury steak. Basically, that's what you would call it. That's what it was.
Hmm.
Um, they have this incredible type of what do you call them? Dumpling, which is like an empanada. It's a big one. It's like,
Yeah.
half the size of a taco or something, or the size
Yeah.
of a street taco folded up.
Sure.
They call it Hershur, and if you need to remember that, you can just think horseshoe, and that's
Horseshoe.
close enough. If
Horseshoe.
you ask for horseshoe, they'll probably know what you're saying. And it's filled with meat and deep fried, and it's incredible. That's the thing that you're gonna miss.
Mm.
If you ever go back to Mongolia, you go straight to the first place and ask for Hershur. They had pretty good beer there. Gobi Altan. It's like golden Gobi beer. It had a camel on it. I had to get that.
There you
It
go.
tasted a little bit like a Bohemia down in Mexico. Gave me more Mexico vibes. So
Wow. Wow.
yeah, really good food. And then we ate, like, we called in at like a real family's house, which again was like part of the tour. So not this actually, even though it was part of the tour, and I'm pretty sure these people do this for like one group every 2 weeks all summer.
Wow.
I think
Extra
this is the
income for them
closest,
or whatever.
yeah, yeah. This is the closest thing to a real family I think we really met.
Hmm.
And this was like big trays of all kinds of meat that was seasoned and grilled. They called it a traditional Mongolian barbecue.
Wow.
And so it was grilled and seasoned, and it would just, they took various parts of some carcass and chopped it up. And so there'd just be this knuckle, right, with a bunch of meat, and you just grab big pieces of it and you just ate as much as you wanted. And it was crazy. And then you'll love this. One of the families we stopped in, and they served us arak, which we were really looking forward to.
Eric?
Arak. That's how
Who
you
was he on the tour?
Arak.
Eric.
It's spelled Arag, but it's with a little bit of a K to it. Arak, and
Oh,
it's fermented,
Iraq. Or like
fermented mares.
arachnophobia, but not nophobia.
Yeah, yeah.
Iraq.
But you're focusing too much on the word, and I've told you 3 times what it is, and you haven't even registered. It's fermented mare's milk. That's a female horse.
Oh,
Female's horse's milk, and it's fermented. And you wouldn't believe. Now you're thinking, oh my God, what,
like cottage
buttermilk?
cheese or something,
What
maybe?
does it taste like? Buttermilk? Does it taste like a crazy what's that stuff you have at Christmas time that you ladle out, and
Eggnog.
no, it doesn't taste like either one of those. It tastes like a kind of a Corona with lime.
No way.
Yeah, it's got this weird.
Is it translucent?
It is white, and there's no getting around. But it's like a super skim milk colored white, and it's got this weird citrus flavor to it somehow, and it has turned, and it is alcohol and a lot of it. And it was a little weird, but man, it was bloody good. And
Really?
we drank a lot of it, and you know,
and you got wasted or what?
Pretty fast. I swore off drinking for a couple of years, but on this trip, I wasn't going to be like a little negative Nancy and, you know, get up on my soapbox or anything like that. So I was just, sometimes somebody put in it, and that's something it's still tradition. If you're in a GER and they hand you something, you accept it and enjoy it.
Right.
That's, it's like the biggest insult in the world. So there's no way I wasn't
pregnant or not, you know. I mean, if you're pregnant, you just go ahead and drink it. And
they were giving us snuff.
Palate never hurt nobody.
Yeah, we had snuff. That's a hilarious joke. We're gonna get canceled for this show. It's upside down every which way. So we had snuff, we had Arak. I got a little tipsy, had a great time. We hung out with the locals. We gave them gifts. I brought headlamps, which I thought would be a good gift, and that was a hit. It's like useful. And so we drank, and then they can refine that stuff even further, and it becomes vodka.
Whoa. Okay.
So I mean, it's not.
Is it still called vodka? Or
they call it Mongolian vodka, even though that's not what vodka is.
It's not a potato. Not from a potato.
The foundation for vodka is not mare's milk. So call it, because it's like white lightning. You know, it's at that point it's just pure alcohol.
Shoot.
So we had that too. So it was great. That was, and so that was another part where the tradition is still kind of alive, and they keep that going.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it sounds to me like y'all had a great experience, and you were obviously very well prepared, right? So was there anything that kind of shocked you? Like what kind of thing shocked you, made you like, whoa?
The thing I think that surprised me the most, which I was most blown away about, was the volcanoes. I was not anticipating seeing volcanoes. And we visited two volcanoes that were so very obviously volcanoes. It was amazing. And like geologically, you kind of think of it, the steppe as this kind of, you know, Lake Baikal is right up the road, and that's a rift valley. So that's where, within the continent, these plates are somehow spreading apart, forming that lake. So there's obviously something going on, some volcanism, some tectonics, but you don't think about. And then the Himalayas are way down on the other side, and Mongolia is just kind of perched on top of them, right? So you don't really think, but they're volcanoes, and they're pretty recent. So they're super well defined, like perfect cones with like a little pond at the bottom. And so very similar to Sunset Crater outside of Flagstaff, which is one of the most recent volcanoes in the U.S. It erupted not within historical times, but pretty recently in prehistory, to where like Native Americans
remember
were there when it happened, and they responded to it. You can see, like, archaeologically they moved into the area to take advantage of the fertile soils. And so Sunset Crater, if you see it or fly over it, it's like a perfect, like, black cone of basalt, and hardly any trees are even growing on it. And that's what these volcanoes were like. Like supposedly the most recent one that erupted, it was like 9,000 years ago, which is not that long ago, geologically speaking. So it's kind of the same thing. A lot of just bare basalt boulders with hardly any trees growing on it. And there were even signs, like, if you can see the lava, like making that ropey texture, if Thomas Schiller were on
like the rope,
there's names for that kind of lava, and they've got Hawaiian names, because that stuff's real common in Hawaii, where there's all these recent eruptions. It's like and Opoi or something like that, but it's like these different textures of lava. If you can see that kind of texture in a rock, it's really recent, because that that starts to erode and smooth out, and you don't see the real texture of like lava becoming cold unless it's really recent. And there was a bunch of that at that volcano. So it was
Wow.
very recent. And I was not, so that landscape was almost just like Yellowstone. It gave me a huge Yellowstone vibe. Like these beautiful mountains with like grasslands where there, instead of bison, there were yaks. There were like elk up in the trees, red deer.
Is there a lot of water?
On the water, there were lakes. So, volcanic lakes like Yellowstone Lake sitting there, and then a volcano. So it's like, wow, I didn't expect to see anything like Yellowstone in Mongolia, and that was very similar.
When I think of a yak, I always think of it like, rising out of the water with the water just dripping down its little, side toupee looking horns, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they were great. They were really cool.
And they're always near the water, right? Yaks are.
They like the water, but they're this like weird high elevation type of cow. So they're in the colder areas. They do real well on like mountain trails, and so they're in the mountains and in the north. And they're really interesting. They're all over the place. And all these animals that we're talking about. This is kind of a cool thing about the tour guides, the tour company. All the meat at the local camps that we stayed at, they sourced the meat locally.
Yeah.
So whatever the dominant livestock was in that area where we were staying was what we were eating. So we ate all of the above. All the livestock I mentioned, we didn't know at any given time what it was we were eating.
Yeah.
But we ate it all. So if it was like horses, we ate horse. If it was yaks, we ate yaks. We ate camel, it was camels. So yeah.
Jeez. Yeah. Well, okay. When you think of the ancient steppe people, right? They were hoarders. Like they would hoard, and they would take all different kind of villages. They would travel all across. I mean, they kind of owned the majority of the world back then. You would think, right? The known world.
Hoarders, as in to form a horde.
To form a horde and pillage and rape and do all that.
Some of our listeners might get confused, as I was when you first said it, that they like stack magazines in their apartments.
No,
like,
no, they weren't. They didn't have all the like Beanie Babies and stuff.
That word comes from a horde was like just a big camp, like a tent village of people, and so I
always think of pillaging horde. Like,
So
running through a village and just, setting everything on fire and killing everybody and taking all their wares. And, their style changed depending on all these different cultures. So the steppe people, historically speaking, since they were nomadic and they traveled all over, you would see them with like a Roman toga and like all these tribal kind of trinkets. They would have a little bit of everybody's culture that they pillaged, right? Whatever town they take that in.
Especially Genghis Khan and his progeny. He kind of started that. He saw the value of that's probably his greatest strength as a tactician, was that he could recognize the value of another culture, like if they were good at something, mostly like from a completely strategic standpoint. So it's like, oh wow, these dudes can completely communicate within their whole vast empire, because they've got this written language. So we need that for like, and we'll have runners, we'll have like a Pony Express 500 years before the Pony Express, and we'll have messengers running around, and we'll adopt this language. So they adopted the language of the Uyghurs, right? They adopted their script, and he brought on some of their great scribes to train up his people how to write. And that, for the longest time, the Mongol script was still that same script, and they changed it when they became under the influence of the sphere of the Russians. So you'll see a little bit of that script in Mongolia, but mostly it's crazy. It's a weird mix. So you'll see the Cyrillic, the Russian letters, and then you'll see a little bit of the ancient Mongol script, and then there's English everywhere.
Yeah.
And then yeah, he got all the they learned how to siege cities from the Chinese.
Mm.
And then it got even like Kublai Khan was even bigger into that. So he got into like he would take a whole city and then just keep all the valuable people. Right, that's the class, and then do something worse to all the rest of the people that they
Sure.
didn't. But yeah, that's all. That's all. So another thing that was going on, which I don't want to be one of these, historians, or I'm not a historian, but one of these people who's like, but actually, what was really going on? They weren't killing that many people because they were, but
Yeah.
what the really cool thing that the steppe people always did with the civilizations was serve as their livestock breeders.
Mm.
So like when you're not hearing about the steppe people descending upon Europe and killing everybody, there's and Attila did that, and he was in the steppes probably like where modern Kazakhstan was or something like that, not Mongolia. And then between Attila and Chinggis Khan, there's like 1,000 years,
Yeah.
right? Not that many. I'm terrible with numbers. Don't trust me. But what were they doing during that? They're still there. They're still
Yeah.
steppe people. They still had those herds. During that time, they were like, if the Chinese empire needed 20,000 horses to go and invade somebody, they would roll up to the steppe and trade with them.
Yeah.
They'd give them silk and get a bunch of camels, and so that's kind of have been their primary role through history as trading with these civilizations, get cross pollination of ideas and
Yeah.
moving horses and livestock. That it's still a unfenced pasture up there, and they're still producing tons of horses. But that's what it was like through history. And then every now and then they would completely rewrite history by invading all of Asia.
Right.
So there were
Yeah.
several pulses of that, but between those pulses of invasion, there was really interesting trade going on.
A lot of trade routes, and well, that brings me to something else about your trip too that I'm very curious on. Whenever I go on a trip, I like to bring something that I'm familiar with, like something from either Mexico, somewhere where I'm like close to, or some kind of, whether it be currency or not, like just little trinkets that make people think of West Texas, right? And then I'll like trade like with them, like for something that's common to them. Was it mainly, do they still do the money thing? Or are they taking cards, or is it more like trading services or goods for other goods?
Oh, it's market driven now since 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed. Mongolia was left hanging, and had to develop their own market economy, and they've done a really great job. Um, so most of the places, the dollar, you can just hand over $20 bill and people will accept it.
American dollar?
Yep, just like in Mexico, just like anywhere, practically almost everywhere in the world. The U.S.
Shoot.
dollar is king there. And out in the country, though, it's not as common. So you do have to change over to the currency that they've got, which is hysterical. I think I always called it the tegral, and I might have been saying that the wrong way the whole time. But 80,000 tegrals is $20. So you're carrying around wads and wads and wads of cash, and they even have small like they'll have like $5 bills, $5 tegrals, on up to a $20,000 bill. And so you could have just a bag stuffed with cash, and it's only like $30.
Jeez, good Lord.
And the card works too. And there's ATMs all over the place, and so it's a good mix. And you're right. Like I brought. I brought gifts for kids and things like, and that's kind of what you were getting at. But I also brought like a little picture book that showed pictures of my family and pictures of Australia and stuff like that. So I thought we could, like, if we got close with anybody, we could kind of pull that out and show them pictures from back home. Of course, nowadays everybody can just do that on their phone.
Sure.
So one of the guys on the trip, he's this great dude. He's a cop from Canada, from Toronto area, and he had footage of himself rolling up on like an active shooter situation with his gun out.
Yeah.
And so he was showing that to kids, and they loved it. They were
I
freaking out. I
bet.
was like, "Oh, you got me there. That's way cooler than this picture of a koala." Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
They were
Wow.
super curious about everything and all that, So yeah, it was good for that sort of thing. So yeah,
Well,
volcanoes were surprising. The Gobi Desert was amazing. The forest, the larches, that was great. We were up in there, and it's like the great Siberian taiga, the type of that
mm,
forest type is the largest forest type in the world. It
wow.
covers the square mileage, from Kamchatka to uh, Norway
Yeah.
and south to Mongolia, and so it was really cool seeing some of that stuff and some of the European birds, like Eurasian birds that you hear about. Like everything's called a lark, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but I saw true larks, the skylark, all these birds you read about like from Shakespeare, you know,
Yeah.
and you see them because you're in Eurasia. So I saw like a skylark, and I saw a cuckoo, like from the
What?
cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo,
Really? Okay.
real bird. They're nest parasites that lay their eggs in other birds' nests, and they're common, and so you'd hear them every morning, cuckoo, cuckoo.
Huh. Yeah,
That was great.
Eurasian skylarks. They're kind of like they look a little like a sparrow or something here.
Yeah, it's a pretty ordinary looking bird, but their mating routine is spectacular. That's what they're famous for. So they fly up into the air, making this pretty song, and they're flying up in kind of this zigzag motion, and they'll go up like
Yeah.
600 feet in the air, and then they just stop and cruise down with their wings like a kite, and then they'll land on the ground, and then in another minute start all over again.
They
So
do
it's really
a little quick cloacal kiss there.
if everything goes well, they've got a cloacal kiss in their future.
There you go. There you go. Very nice. So if you've learned anything, say you're going to go back in 2 weeks,
Yeah.
what would you do differently to prepare for it in 2 weeks and get even more out of it?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, I tried talking to one of the guides. I was like, look, talk to your boss, tell him to make a special tour where you charge $50 more per person, and pile that $50 together for my plane ticket, and I'll come back. I'll come back every year, and we'll do a wildlife tour, and I'll guide with you.
Yeah.
And so I would love to do that, and I'm going to get in touch with this guy, but probably they won't go for it because what they would probably rather do, which would probably be better, is recruit their own Mongolian expert who could do
Right.
the same,
Yeah.
and not piss away money getting some gringo to come up there. But it was my attempt to. It would be really cool to go back.
Yeah.
It would be. And I think I'd love to spend more time in the Gobi Desert. I thought it was pretty amazing. It's the harshest desert I've ever been in. It puts ours to shame. So I've
Really?
visited. Yeah, it really does. And so I've traveled extensively in Australian deserts and North American deserts. This is my first. This is my first. What a lot of people throughout the world, like world biogeographers and geographers, would not call Australian deserts or U.S. deserts true deserts.
Hmm.
So this is the first desert I've been in that where inarguably this is a true desert. This is
Hmm.
where the rainfall is so little that it supports nearly basically no vegetation, what they call an absolute desert. And so it's this place where it's just basically stony ground and maybe a little sand, to where if the wind picks up,
Yeah.
you like this hanging mist of dust, and it causes a dust storm like every single afternoon because there's no vegetation to hold down anything.
Yeah.
Uh, and you read about that, like places like the Sahara or in Arabia, this kind of hanging mist of dust, and where the dust can pick up and is immediately you're like incapacitated by a dust storm. And we've seen dust storms in West Texas,
Oh yeah.
but you don't get them every afternoon,
Oh
right?
dang.
If the wind picks up,
Yeah.
you don't necessarily. It takes like a storm front to get
Yeah.
that dust rolling. And in the Gobi, it takes like an afternoon wind picking up, and that's all it takes. And you're in a dust storm.
And you got
So
crunchy teeth. You're just crunching
yeah,
away on
yeah.
that
And it's like
sand.
I still went out. I wasn't gonna let that stop me. I still went out hiking in a storm like that. And it was fine. But when it really picked up, you had to lean into it. You had to close your eyes, and it got uncomfortable. And it was by no means as bad as that desert can get, because you read about some of these, like, imagine in a place like that, if you do get a storm front, right? Like if you get a West Texas dust storm in Mongolia, then you're really in it. And we
Yeah.
never saw that. So yeah, it was cool to see a true desert, and it would be really cool. I think there's probably a lot more to discover in that desert environment, because it's
Yeah.
really big, and it's amazing how few reptiles there are. There's basically like one kind of lizard, like a horned lizard, more or less. It's a
Like a
little
horny
pebble,
toad?
kind of like a horny toad, and it's like the most common lizard out there, and it's everywhere, and they're super variable. Like, every other one looks totally different from the next, and that's interesting. But I figured, there's all these little isolated volcanic ranges and other little nooks and crannies, and it's just not very well explored,
Yeah.
still to this day.
Wow.
I found the boas, which are like the little kangaroo rats of the old world deserts. So it was really spectacular. But yeah, I thought, yeah, if I spend enough time, I'll bet, going back every year as a tour guide and convince them, this time let's go camp over in this range where nobody's ever been. You'd
Yeah,
probably just
that does bring up a question. Like, so I'm thinking, first off, I'm thinking geographically, like how close are you to Tuva? Because I remember the throat singing that kind of originated, from Tuva, and I was thinking of all the different kind of culturistic music you could have listened to on the way. But when you started, you said you kind of made this jackknife through the entire country, through Mongolia. I was wondering, like, were you closer or further away from Tuva? Because Tuva's like northwestern.
Yeah,
part.
we ended up very close to Tuva. When we go to the far north, we're right next to Tuva. We were within like 20 miles of the Russian border.
Wow.
Where we ended up. There's a lake up there. Oh, the lake's name escapes me, but they call it the Sister of Baikal. So it's part of the same rift system. It's the biggest lake in Mongolia, and it's big and deep like Baikal, but it's not as big, and it's right there on the border. So we were, and I think just on the other side, where if you enter Russia in that area, you're right there in that region near Tuva. So the reindeer people were near there where we were, if they're still doing that. And like I guess there's this kind of subgroup of Mongols who stayed in Russia, who have lived in Russia for a long time, and they're up that way. And so
yeah. And so did you hear any interesting music? Did they have that on the tour, or were like out here you go to eat dinner and you'll hear some live music playing somewhere?
Matchbox 20. Yeah, Matchbox 20 cover band.
yeah.
Well, so they had the guys on the tour were playing for us, Mongolian music, which sounded like there's this interesting combination. It was like really well produced with like orchestra, but then it would just be like these guys kind of belting almost operatically.
Yeah.
Deep. But so it doesn't seem like, when you roll in, I'm trying to think of anywhere in the world where you were to go and it would be like the traditional dress and song and everything, where they're not just putting it on.
Right.
So like, if you went to the South and to Alabama and you went to a debutante ball, they would play, like Dixie, and there would be women dressed as Southern belles, and that's not real, right? They're putting it on.
All right.
And I got the impression that in Mongolia, they've still got all those traditions, but they're kind of putting it on. They're not always dressed that way. They dress up that way when there's like a family reunion, right? they wear all this traditional dress. And when they go to the big festival, the Nandan festival, we were there during Nandan time, which is the big festival where they celebrate the three manly sports, which are wrestling, archery, and horseback.
Hmm.
I can't argue.
Horseback is a sport. They just have to.
Well, they race.
Oh,
race.
okay. Do they do rodeos?
It's not. It's just racing.
It's just racing. Okay.
Racing. Yeah.
So
They're not about. It's just assumed that they know how to herd, right? They don't have to prove it.
Right.
And all these kids will be like 8-year-olds on horseback riding around the Nandan Festival, bareback.
Wow. And shooting bows and arrows on horseback.
Well, so the archery is separate. You're on the ground, you're shooting. They probably don't shoot from the horse anymore. No need. And then wrestling is their thing. And all three of those different contestants of those sports are dressed up in the traditional dress. Gotcha. And then they take off all that ridiculous stuff and put on blue jeans and a t-shirt and then get on their motorcycle and drive home, right? So they're putting it on, but not like I don't want to. It's not putting it on to the extent that a debutante ball is putting it on.
Sure. Right? Well, when you talk like that, I'm just thinking when people come down to Texas, like, dude, every single day you can go into any restaurant, you'll see 24 people with big old satellite belt buckles, cowboy hats, a button-up shirt, and some way too tight blue jeans.
Posers. And you go to the bar in Marfa, and the guy has got his eye patch and his 20-gallon Stetson and his pink t-shirt. That's a poser. He's putting it on. He's got his
around his leg.
His perpetually empty horse trailer. He's driving around with his big Chevy. He's putting it on. It's fake. These people were more real than that. So there's a scale. Let's say there's a scale. On one side, there's the absolutely ridiculous debutante ball in Alabama. On the other side, there is maybe some place on earth where you could just step off the plane, get in a Jeep, drive, and they're wearing their traditional dress, doing their traditional thing, singing their traditional music with no iPhone in sight, right? No satellite dish, never heard of either. I've never seen that, but it may exist. And then closer to that side of the spectrum is where the Mongols are right now.
Okay.
Where they're putting it on a little bit, but I think there's certainly people within living memory who that's all they know.
Yeah.
Right. So there's people hanging around at those festivals who are like, this is great. This is like when I was growing up, when all we knew were these clothes.
Yeah.
And nobody spoke English, nobody spoke Russian. It was just this. This is great to see this again. That's probably that's what's going on right now.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, I know just going to rodeos, like everybody, they dress up in their cow. No, they're not posers. They're real. They're doing Halloween. The real thing.
It's Halloween.
No, it's not. No, I see it all the time, man. They're just dressed as, and that's their style. It's a cool style, and I kind of enjoy it, whenever I see it every once in a while. But I mean, I got my own style. Everybody has their own style, right? And so you got to respect that a little bit. And so no, that's cool that they have that. So okay, one of my final questions here: how did you sleep? And how did you shower?
Oh. Well, I sleep terrible on the best day. I slept pretty fine. I slept okay on this trip. I got a rigorous schedule.
Well, did you sleep in a yurt? Did you sleep like?
You don't want to know how I slept. So you sleep in a yurt.
Okay, you do sleep in that.
You go to these little villages, tent villages of gurs, and they're all in like a little row, and they're for tourists. So it's like
just pick one out.
And they're really nice, like a nice bed with, it's not camping. It's, some people might consider it camping, but
is there electricity?
Yeah, there were places where you could charge your, cameras and phones and stuff at most of these places. Sometimes it was touch and go, but for the most part, it was easy. And then you asked where we slept, and then what was the other thing?
Well, so you slept in those gurs. right?
Yeah.
The girths.
Oh, how'd you go to the bathroom? You said.
Well, oh, did you shower? How did you shower?
Yeah.
And
So at most of them there was a shower house, and so
okay,
it's a typical kind
y'all
of thing.
shower
Though.
together?
No, it wasn't like army style. There would be separate little stalls, and there were flush toilets at most of these camps. Outside of the camps, things got really bad. This is the other thing you hear about Mongolia is that like if you need like you're gonna find these pits with wooden slats where you just squat on the wooden slats and poop between them.
Oh
And it
man.
was an utter nightmare. Mostly because like the grossness didn't really bother me so much, although it did. I'll admit it. What bothered me was the idea that you would squat on those little 2x4s and then hear and then you go falling down into the
Oh
pit.
my gosh, yeah.
That kept me
And
out of. I
slowly
was like,
sink.
oh hell no! I'll just go. I'd rather poop in front of everybody in the middle of the grass. I'll
Yeah.
poop in front of everyone. They can just watch me do it before I go into the Temple of Doom. I'm
Yeah.
not going to do that. So the embarrassment, you're peeing everywhere. Men are just peeing out in the grassland, right? And at any time the bus stops, and these, of course, it, women aren't into that as much, right? So they and the guides are not really they're not keying in on this, and so they're not. What should have happened on the first day is like, okay, when we stop the bus, you guys should feel free to pee in the woods, pee outside, and what we're gonna do is have the women's side be over here and the men's side be over here, and then no one's gonna see you do it. It'll all be great. And no one ever said anything like that. The guides just were clueless. They were like, why aren't these people peeing? What's
Right.
wrong with them?
Yeah.
Are they are they some sort of strange Martian? Do they not have the
Were there a lot of
physiology?
cotton flowers on this tour, like outside? The toilet paper growing
No,
from the
because
ground.
everybody was too afraid, So yeah, so you find pit. So that would be trying for a lot of people. That's a little rustic. And I'll mention one last thing, which was cool. One of the highlights of the trip is on one of those pee breaks on the side of the highway. We found wild growing marijuana.
All right, nice.
And
Anyone
like,
partake?
no, it was. I thought later, I was like, wait a second, I could have just. I don't know how to make weed, but I could have just grabbed a bunch and dried it out and rolled it up and just checked out. You can't go
No
really
one
wrong.
cares. Yeah, no,
So
no one
it was
cares.
neat.
It's cool.
It's
The
like
medicine. It's a
it grows
medicine.
wild. This wasn't like escape from somebody's field. That's where it grows.
Well, it is a weed. I
Out of
mean,
the
it
road.
literally is. It's
Yeah.
a weed.
I never realized that there were male and female pot
Mhm.
plants
Oh yeah.
until I saw males and females growing side by side.
Yeah, you gotta populate them. You gotta get that good mix in, man. You gotta get the best stuff with the best stuff. Not that I
Yeah,
would know anything about that, but
I'm so clueless that I was like, oh, that's interesting. They've got two sexes. There's not that
hey,
many plants do that.
yeah,
Not that many
yeah,
plants.
that's
There are
what
some.
definitely does separate it and make it very unique. So, well, all right. Well, what's your Aesop's fable moral to the story?
The moral to the story is that people should travel, get out there. If think about Mongolia, and a lot of people, the first thing in their head, they're like, "Whoa, what's that like?" And I was the same way. The most recent stuff I'd read about it was like 100-year-old accounts of traveling when it would have probably been pretty touch and go at that time. There's some more modern books about what it's like, but it's changed so much in the last 20 years that you really got to go to see it. But my point is, like, Mongolia is one of those places that's like so far out that everybody thinks, oh, I'll never go there. And here I just went, and it wasn't that expensive, and it was
Really?
great. It was great.
So it's not very expensive. I mean, you can
No,
carry a
that
bag
was,
full of
that was another thing.
80,000
Like,
whatever they have.
yeah,
Yak knuckles.
it's this weird combination of like it's a developing nation where it's not super poor and where they seem to be putting a lot, they're making a ton of money off of like oil and gas and other mining and stuff. And I think they're really funneling that money right back into the economy instead of just like hoarding it all.
Sure.
I think that's why fuel is so cheap. Number one, I think they're producers. And number two, I think they're subsidizing the hell out of it. So
Probably.
it's super cheap for the the common man. So and that works in your direction for tourists.
How many dollars would it be to fill up a tank, you think?
Yeah, so probably it's probably like $20 or something like that to fill a big tank.
A big tank up? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Those are the days.
I think it's cheaper than the US. Yeah.
Yeah.
And way cheaper than Australia.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, cool, man. All right. Well, you heard them here. You heard it here right now. Get out there, travel, experience the world.
Don't go to Mongolia. Go somewhere else. Leave Mongolia alone. Mongolia is mine.
Well,
Go to
yeah, but what
Iran.
if they want to get you on a tour there, like hire you as a guide?
Well, if you want to hire me as your personal tour guide, just contact sciencenights.org and we'll negotiate a very, very cheap price. It won't be Mongol prices, but it'll be reasonable.
Cynights.com, cynights.com, SCIKNIGHTS.com. Book today. All right. Well, there's another episode in the books, the Science Night in the Morning. Sean Graham, thank you so much. We'll see y'all next week. Thanks for listening to this episode of Science Nights in the Morning. Be sure and follow us on Patreon for exclusive gear and uncut episodes. Check out the latest science articles on our Facebook page and subscribe to us on YouTube and your favorite podcast listening app. And if you got a question, we'll join the discussion. Hit the hotline at 432-217-1983 and record your message. We couldn't do this without you, and thank you so much for listening each and every week. That's Science Nights in the Morning with a K. And we'll see you next time.